video, I'm going to give a brief overview of the general process to add and recall data. I'm also going to explain about how and when to use the runtime error reset functionality. The first thing to note is that embedded within the tool are a number of data quality checks that are designed to prevent these runtime errors. So a runtime error is just when the macro cannot run fully and it stops before it's reached the end. And so it can cause incomplete calculations, incorrect calculations, and just in general issues throughout the tool. So if something like this does happen, you need to reset it and try again. So as I was saying, there are these data quality checks that are in place to try and prevent these runtime errors from happening. And these runtime errors might be, for example, when a calculation expects a numerical value but encounters an alphabetical input instead. So one of the first actions of the macro is to validate any data that's been input, and if the inputs aren't as expected, a warning pop-up box will appear. So when adding data, there's sort of a trend throughout the tool. So you've got this basic data as the first input that is required. So if I flick to the other ones, you've got the same inputs that you will need to do on each tab. It's a little bit different for overheads, but not massively. I mentioned that now, but there's obviously a video on the overheads input where everything about that will be explained. So you will typically need to include your name, a project code, a record type, so specifying whether it's forecast or actual, and then a start and an end date. And then you can, if you want, input any additional notes. So the additional notes is the only optional input. All the others must be input for the tool to function correctly. So a few key rules to notice is you can only input data for a project that already exists within the tool. So as you'll see in this video, there's already quite a lot of data that's already been input into the tool. The rest of the videos follow sort of a chronological order. So after this, you have the office input, and that you need to do as your first step, and then you have the project input, which would be your second step, and sort of you need to follow the videos in order. But I thought it would be more useful to put this one at the front to sort of show the general functionalities of the tool and the different buttons. But in order to demonstrate it fully, I needed to already have some data input into the tool, otherwise it wouldn't be possible to demonstrate. So if the project you want to add data for isn't visible in the drop-down, then you will just need to navigate to the project input and input another project here. So we just have one project at the moment input into the database, so that's the one we're going to select. And then for record type, actual versus forecast, that's covered in more detail in the introduction video. So for project specific data, you cannot input data outside of the project start and end date. So this project, if we go to the project input tab, we can see that it starts in 1st of Jan 24 and ends in at the 1st of June 25. So that means that throughout the tool, we can only enter data for this project within these two dates. If the project is extended for whatever reason, then you will need to just amend the project input in the project database to reflect the reality, and then you'll be able to input the data there. So when inputting forecast data, you can see that these cells go dark grey. General rule across the whole tab: if there is a dark grey box, then this means do not input anything into it and do not amend anything that's already in it. So if you're entering a forecast entry, it will automatically select the start and the end date of a project. So once you've entered all the required data, you can select add. I'm just going to demonstrate some of the errors you may encounter. So if we don't put a project code, please ensure a project has been input. If no projects have been input into the tool, then please go to the project input tab. So you need to make sure that you select a project. If I type in the grey box, you will see you cannot choose start and end dates for a forecast entry. The project start and end dates are used by default. And then if you remember, the project start and end date was 1st of Jan 24 to 1st of June 25. So if I put in the 31st of December 25, we would get an error saying the project data being input is outside of the project start and end date. Please try again or amend the project entry in the project input tab. And then the final thing to notice is, as I said, that additional notes is optional, but all others must be input. So if I remove the name, you'll get an error saying please ensure that all the basic data has been input. Now those are the sort of data quality checks that are in place for the basic data as they are called throughout the tool, but there are also checks on the data underneath, but those will be explored in more depth in the tab specific videos. So I'm just going to demonstrate adding some data here. If this all looks very confusing, then you just need to watch the bill of quantities video and it will become clear. I just want to show you what happens when you click add. Sorry, there we are. I need to change the dates. So once you hit add, you'll see the spinny wheel. Some might take longer than others, it depends how complex the calculation is, but once you've clicked add, you should be able to navigate to the emissions database, and if you go to the bottom, you should see the data that you've just input, and we can see Jan 24 to Jan 25, and we can see that it is a live entry. So in the data marker, there are a variety of things you might see. So you might see live, split, master, or failed. Sorry, live, failed, or master. Master will be explained in the overhead, so it's very overhead specific. Failed is when you do a runtime error reset, and live is when the data has been input correctly and will be pulled through onto the dashboard. So only live data will be visible in the final calculations and the final the final tables on the dashboard or the CSV exports. You'll only see live data. So if I go back to the input tab, so if you do get a runtime error, then you just need to click the runtime error reset. This cancels any partially entered records in the emissions database, and then after you've done that, try resubmitting the data, and if the issue persists, then get in touch and we'll support you where we can. But yeah, this is basically, if you input data, comes up, the macro throws an error which doesn't look familiar or explain. It will say runtime error and then a code and then something that you may not understand. And so you just need to go check in the emissions database that if the data has been partially input, if you can see the entry that you were trying to do and it says live or it might just be blank, then you definitely need to hit the runtime error reset, because a runtime error means that the macro hasn't finished completely, so the carbon calculation could be incomplete or incorrect, and so you need to nullify it. So I'll just demonstrate what happens. You click runtime error reset, and then you can go to the emissions database and we can see that this has now been changed to failed. So that's sort of how it's dealt with. Unfortunately, well, we hope first of all that this doesn't ever need to happen. You don't ever need to use this button, but unfortunately we can't be entirely sure, so it's in there as a precaution. Unfortunately I can't demonstrate it to you because I've done my absolute best to try and ensure that we do not get any runtime errors. So I don't know how to make one happen because we're hoping they don't. So aside from runtime errors, if you think that you've made a human error and that something you've previously entered is not quite correct, if it's in the wrong units, represents the wrong time period, then you can use the recall function. So to do this, you just need to follow these steps. So you go to the emissions database, find the record number of the record you want to amend. So say we want to amend record number 27. So I guess one thing to note is you can only amend live data entries. You can't amend the failed ones, the master ones, or the amended ones. So the tool, this is again a data quality check that is in place, so the tool will not allow you to do that. So if we recall 27, you first of all need to find what category it is in, to find what tab you need to recall it from. So you can't go trying to recall transport data into the bill of quantities tab. It just won't work because it won't know where to put all the data. So if it's bill of quantities, you need to direct back to the bill of quantities. There are two bill of quantities tabs, a core and an optional, so that's indicated here. So it's bill of quantities core. So we go back to the bill of quantities core and we recall, and so perhaps the bill of quantities wasn't the best one to demonstrate on, because you can amend multiple records, but in all of the other tabs you can only recall one record at a time, sort of covered in more depth in the bill of quantities. So I'm just going to click no here for now. So please input the record number. So it was 27. Why is the record being amended? So it's actually a forecast. Incorrect record type. So we can see here now that it's record number 27. You got your amendment reason there, and let's say it's actually an actual record, and it's just for the first month of the year. As always, need to input your name, and hopefully we'll be able to see here we've got £1,000. So the data will be recalled and put in, so you can amend it however you'd like, and then you just click add as usual. So I would just make a note that these boxes, so if this amendment data is visible in the input tab, this means that the tool will assume that you are making changes to an existing record. So if you can see this, but if you're trying to input new data, but you can see this, and you can see a record number, then it will amend that record number. And so if this is not actually what you would like to do, if you actually want to be inputting new data, then you can just click clear, and it will disappear, and the tool will input a new record as expected. So let me just add that, and I'll recall it again. It was number 27, wasn't it? Let's put testing, and let's just change that to, and let's just change this to £500. And then if we add that back in, and I navigate towards the emissions database, we can see that, so record number 30 was the one where I decided it was actually a new input and I didn't want to amend a previous one. So that has just been input at the same, so it was £1,000, and that's a live entry. And then this one, however, is an amendment of record number 27 for testing reasons. So this is a live record, and then if we go up to record number 27, we can see that now says amended. So this means that this record will no longer be pulled through to the dashboard or exported on a CSV because we've changed that record. So you may encounter some barriers when trying to recall data. These safeguards are in place to prevent circumstances that could disrupt calculations or the tool's functionality. So as previously mentioned, these are, you can only amend live data, so not amended or failed entries. So as I have shown you, this is in the final column of the emissions database. So let's try and recall number 27 again, just so I can demonstrate what would happen if you did do that. So let's recall 27. This record has been amended or cancelled. To amend a record, it must be a live entry. There we are. And then also I already mentioned the tab specific recall, so you can only recall an entry that was originally input from the same tab you're recalling from. So if I try to recall, I won't be able to recall 27 anymore because it's been changed, but 31 is the new entry. So if I try and recall that from the project thing, even though we know that it's a bill of quantities core input. So let's try 31. The record is not a project transport input. Please choose a different data entry or try another input tab. So that's another thing to notice. And then finally, with the overheads, when recalling overheads data is a bit different, will be explained more in the overheads video, but you should enter the overhead number as indicated in the overheads database, which is this one. So it should always have an OH prefix. And additionally, overheads data is split into monthly resolution. So this OH1M, which indicates master, has been split into 12 entries to represent a whole year. And so if you're trying to recall this, then you have to recall the master record, which is indicated by a -M suffix. So I've just very briefly covered that, but it's obviously covered in more detail in the overheads input tab. So hopefully that's sort of a brief overview of adding, amending and runtime error reset. But there are demonstrations on all the tabs in all of the later videos.